in, Andrew.
Okay, so hi everyone, welcome to this afternoon's press conference to officially launch the Havering Anti-Overdevelopment Group, Preserve, which is in part a response to the government's proposed changes to planning policy. The group's also going to be using this meeting to launch their petition against the government's development charter, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that in a moment. And I'll provide a link to that in the group chat as well for any press that need it. The meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the press following its close. I'm Andrew Achilleos, I work for John, and I'll be facilitating the meeting today. House rules are really straightforward. We've all done this before a few weeks back. So can everyone keep their microphones muted? I'll come to speakers in turn. And if the press can keep their questions till last, that'd be great. So on the call today, we have John Cruddas, the MP for Dagenham and Rainham, Councillor Graham Williamson from South Hornchurch Ward, Andrew Curtin, who's the chair of the Romford Civic Society and a former Havering councillor, Julia Herold, the director of AC Preou, and we'll also be having a statement read out from Richard Carr, who's the managing director for Rainham Steel. And in terms of press, we have Michael Cox from the Romford Recorder and Ross Elliott from the Havering Daily. So with that, go over to our first speaker today, that's John Cruddas.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice to see everyone again. I suppose the first point I'd make is literally since we last talked, a few of us, a couple of weeks ago, the debate has moved on, and you see a growing national coalition against the government's planning proposals that were unveiled in August. I'll give you an example. Just in the last 2 weeks, Theresa May, the last Conservative Prime Minister before the present one, Bob Neill, MP in South London, Teresa Villiers, an MP in North London, have all come out against the Conservative government's planning proposals. And this is alongside Liberal opposition, Labour opposition. So you can see a lot of people are putting their political differences aside and coming together to register their concerns about the implications for their own areas of these planning proposals. And I think that's basically what we're doing. We're coming together, parking some of our political differences and trying to raise the profile of some of the issues that are in play that are truly significant. Just today, for example, Sadiq Khan has warned against the government planning reforms that risks undoing years of progress on housing delivery. He called them ill-conceived, rushed and damaging. He said in his formal response to the government white paper for reforming the planning system, he said, "The mayor is clear. The minister's plans could alienate communities across the capital, undermine local accountability in planning decisions, and make it far harder for London to build the homes and infrastructure it needs. Mayors and local councils would have less power to ensure new developments include genuinely affordable homes and have the backing of local people." And that's precisely the arguments we've been trying to make over the last month to try and flag up what's coming down the runway. That's why Labour, local residents associations, Conservative, community groups are all coming together to register their concerns. And I would hope that the Conservative MPs in the borough, as well as the Conservative Council and the Town Hall, come out against these proposals, just like other Conservative colleagues have done, Theresa May, Bob Neill and the like. Because I think almost more than anywhere, South Havering, the implications of these developments were huge. Just to reiterate, in August, the government announced its plans to overhaul the planning system. It's literally ripping up the post-war planning system. The government will dictate how many homes are built in each area, and these targets will be binding. And it basically removes layers of accountability and local democratic oversight of planning, especially community involvement, especially in terms of specific proposals as they affect local communities. And the concern is that South Havering will become a dumping ground for Whitehall's targets. And a lot of the themes that have been raised by Outer London MPs, that this will see the growing urbanisation of Outer London. That's why people like Bob Neill and Teresa Villiers have registered their concerns. And it allows developers to bypass the planning system so they're not obliged to contribute towards affordable housing supply and bring communities along with the planning process. Now, at present, we have huge problems around the present planning system. We have almost week by week rows with the authority about ensuring people's voice are included from an early stage, and that the changes, the planning proposals are changed almost overnight at will, and there's very little that we can appear to do about it. And this will make the situation even worse. So I think basically we're trying to come together to urge a rethink by the government and actually the local authority to make sure that we have a genuinely democratic planning system that takes communities with it. It's not an anti-development thing. This is a question of good development versus bad development. And we're worried about the direction of travel. So we think it's incumbent on us all to come together to raise the profile of these issues and actually launch the petition to register people's concerns. And we're going to invite all sorts of community groups, residents groups, charities, voluntary sector, the business communities, local political representatives of all political persuasions, and just local citizens who want to get involved in this to try and really raise the profile of this over the coming weeks and months. So really, this is what we're announcing today. And that's the sort of general perspective in terms of where I sit as a representative in Westminster. And you can see that this is not going to go away. This is going to get a louder and louder protest from across the length and breadth of the political community at Westminster and I think locally. So that's all I'll say by way of introduction, Andrew.
Brilliant, thanks, John. Can I bring in Councillor Graham Williamson next? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I echo everything that John has just said, and we are launching this petition, particularly about the Developers Charter, but there's two aspects of that charter which is quite worrying. The first is that the government want to make it easier for developers to get applications through a wider promotion of permitted development. So therefore, anything converting a shop will get permitted development. The problem with permitted development, of course, is there's very little controls over what's actually built and densities, etc., etc. So it may speed up the process as far as the developer is concerned. It doesn't obviously help the local community. The second problem, which has been downplayed at the moment, although I think John is quite aware of this, is housing targets. Because in my opinion, housing targets in general is the villain of the piece. The chasing of those targets is what's driving a lot of the government plans and the existing issues that we have, say, in particularly Havering, maybe other outer boroughs, but particularly Havering. And I want to actually look at why it is Havering in particular is suffering, in our opinion, through potential overdevelopment. At the moment, of course, housing targets is always seen to be an mayoral demand, but we all know now, or many of us know, that the government are demanding not only what Sadiq Khan would like, but what they would like, and that's even greater. And that's been downplayed, particularly by our own council at the moment, but that's the reality of it, and we have plenty of evidence to support that. So the overdevelopment is happening right now, regardless of what may come down the road. And there's talk about the government wanting 3 times what the mayor wants, which is unbelievable if that were true. We'll see what happens. Now, these targets were originally created by the GLA based on what the councils identified as land that could be built upon, in other words, land capacity. This began from 2004, and from 2009 was called the Strategic Land Availability Assessment, or Cllr, which most people may recognise. It was a dangerous statistic because regardless of whether the land could actually be built upon, because land ownership or whatever, the targets were set. And here is the rub. Havering fully cooperated with the GLA requests because, according to one of our officers, they wished to curry favour with the mayor. This is anecdotal, but this is what I was told, in the hope that we would somehow benefit. Other similar outer boroughs, such as Richmond, Sutton, and Merton, identified far less land, and subsequently every target post-2004 has seen the gap between those boroughs and demand and Havering's demand widen. I'll give you an example. In 2004, Havering's housing target was 350 properties per year, and Richmond's was 270. In 2016, Havering's had increased to 1,170. A 334% increase, but Richmond only 315, only 17% higher. I discussed this with one of the aforesaid boroughs, and they privately confirmed to me that they had deliberately offered less land. This is supported by the London plan as well, by the way, if anybody wants to check that a number of outer boroughs didn't give anything near as much as Havering did. So that's quite worrying. In another own goal, the supposed housing demand for Havering is based on the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, which is SHMAR, sorry for the acronyms, except it is based on the whole of the northeast of London, which is clearly skewed. It's not Havering's, we're just lumped together with a much wider area where there's greater demand anyway. More seriously, the figure in 2016, touted by the councils to justify the need for these housing targets, was originally delayed from being published whilst knowingly waiting for a larger GLA had to be. So I accuse the council in not protecting Havering by saddling us with these targets. I think it's very important to dig into the history of these things. Havering has shot itself in the foot. And every housing target that we are faced with by the government and the mayor depends upon the land that we offered in the early days. And we went over the top. What are the consequences then of this? The consequence of chasing such housing targets is a cutting of corners. Give example, Orchard Village. Increasing densities, rising heights across most new developments. Not just the 20 stories, the 3 to 5 to 7 in 2-story housing areas. That's now getting justified, when 10 years ago it would never ever be allowed. Endless apartment blocks and a lack of houses and gardens, and a loss of green spaces. Recent example, Upminster Pitch and Pot. Given that only 48% of our land is brownfield development, it's always going to be dense and high, because at the moment, the government's saying you can't build on greenbelt. I'm not suggesting we do, but it means Havering's actually got a very small area that it can build on, because so much of it is greenbelt. So we're naturally going to be building very dense developments. Worse still, we know that developer and other agency contributions will be 65% short of the monies required for the necessary infrastructure. I had a meeting last night, and there are no answers to that. And our fear very much is that the development will go ahead and there will be no money or insufficient monies for infrastructure. Another serious matter that hopefully Preserve will investigate and promote in due course. What are the answers then? Well, there's no magic bullets, as both the government and the GLA have so far identified East London, of which Havering is included, as one of their prime targets for mass house building. It's all on record in the London plan in particular, it talks about that. Like this council, however, I believe there's lots we can actually do. We should lobby to protect our suburbia and urge authority to support new towns instead, and promote a national conversation on population growth and where that should be located if there is growth. We should encourage our planners to be more robust in defending the character of an area instead of justifying change and creating precedents. And what this is that increasingly the planners, our own planners, are saying, well, there's a block of flats a mile down the road which we can see through binoculars. Therefore, that's part of the character of the area. It seems absurd what I'm saying, but since I haven't been on planning ever since I was a councillor, I know exactly what's happening. The goalposts are being moved to justify dense tower blocks in an area which perhaps is all 2-story houses. Crucially, we need to use our local plan to defend that character, something we are not doing at the moment, and thus leaving our planners weaponless in negotiation with developers. I'll give you some examples. Restoring limits on story heights. In 2008, it was predominantly, it had to be restricted up to 3 stories only, predominantly in the development. And in Romford, around 6 stories. That has gone out the window. And the local plan we're going to introduce is stripped away all the heights, minimising the growth of back garden developments and HMOs. Very important, because that's creating lots of social problems. Protecting existing green spaces by more open space designation and village green status, all of which can be done if you want to do it. Instead, our council has been going out of its way to facilitate overdevelopment, knowing full well we haven't got the money for the infrastructure. Do we want to saddle future generations in conflict with existing residents to get GP surgeries, to get to dentists, weeks and weeks on end? We'll see. It's already happening now with the COVID responses. The other side of the medical profession is struggling now to look after people's other problems. I can see that becoming the norm. And it doesn't have to be that way. For example, there is a large development that has been passed and does fit in with Havering's character, namely on the old St George's Hospital site. I will present a case study at our next conference on this because there were specific reasons as to why. But for example, the administration didn't control the planning committee at that time when it was passed. Ward members were involved at a very early stage, and the developer preferred to win local support rather than alienating it. The site will include many family homes and gardens, actually 40% of the development, would you believe that? And blocks only 2 to 4 stories high, and delivering an overall density much lower than the ones we're seeing right now. That is a model for the future, and I'd like the press particularly to take note of that. And I will come back to that in a future development, because we can repeat that everywhere in Havering, but it's not happening right now because there's an open door in planning and in this administration. And perhaps a later speaker, Andrew, will specifically focus perhaps on Romford and the problems they're facing, loss of their historical character. Now, if we don't put in these protections, Havering will be, in my opinion, will become a dormitory borough with a serious loss of industry, which is already planned for, by the way, businesses, retail, and of course jobs, which residents will have to travel outside the borough to access. We have 5 minutes to midnight to stop the clock before it will be too late to turn things around. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much for that, Graham. And next, I'm going to be bringing in Andrew Curtin. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So first of all, so I chair Romford Civic Society. We deal with the centre of Romford. We've got a clearly defined area of interest in our constitution. We have already, we're members of the London Forum of Civic and Amenity Societies, which brings together all the groups like us from across the capital. And we've submitted comments on the government's white paper. I was glad to hear particularly from John that Bob Neal is expressing concern about this, because he's also a former Havering councillor, and he's, in my opinion, a very good, level-headed proper Tory. And one of the things which we picked out and really supported the London Forum, which is a huge organisation. It's better, obviously, if all of us organisations across London speak with one voice. But one of the things we're particularly interested in is they pick up the point which is in the white paper about having clear local vision. And one of the things the London Forum is saying is that often isn't happening. And certainly in our experience, it's one of the key problems in Romford. And I'll come back to that later on. But in terms of some of the changes that has already happened, then probably disproportionately in the middle of Romford, the community has been affected by the changes allowing offices to become housing. And we all agree that people need housing, but I think it was an MP from South London, maybe South East London recently, or about a year ago, was saying that's been introduced, but there's no review mechanism to see what's happening. And from my own life, I previously worked at a school where we had quite a number of children who were living in those adapted properties, and their quality of life was not good, because in the middle of Romford, there is, inside the ring road, there's nowhere for them to go and play. There's nowhere for those kids to go and let off steam, and that's environmental planning, and it's not happening, and it's an area of frustration for us, and also the way the local plan is operated, which Graham picked up on. So, as a civic society, our interest in the centre of Romford, it's around its environment. So we're not a political party. We famously say we don't deal with people, really. We deal with the environment. So we deal with green issues and biodiversity, which is a huge matter. I mean, when you look at that big map of London on the floor of City Hall, you can see most of Havering is very green until you get to the middle of Romford. And then it's a biodiversity nightmare because it is entirely concrete. We work on new builds, liaise with developers where we can. obviously conservation of the historic environment, and issues to do with street scene, cleanliness, all of those other really important things. So coming back to the issue about this clear local vision, probably our big concern at the moment is complete incoherence in what the political administration, which is almost entirely Romford councillors, what they're doing. So let's give you some examples. On Waterloo Road Estate, Romford councillors are proposing 1,400 flats. There are 300 there at the moment. They started off proposing a 20-storey block. It came into our possession, shall we say, an image of what they were proposing, and we just put it on our Facebook page and said, are they sure about this? They panicked. The 20-storey block disappeared, was replaced by a 16-storey block, but the way they did that was not by reducing the number of units. What they did was double the height of the blocks right at the end of people's gardens of the neighbouring roads. So whereas before, if you lived in the roads, then the gardens they're not tiny, but they're not huge. There was a 2-storey block, and I think most people I've spoken to there was sort of, well, you know, and then it became 4 stories. So I'm not sure that that development is much further forward. And then we come to Bridge Close, and obviously Julia will talk about this much more. 1,100 flats, Romford councillors, as we understand it, want there. What is it, a doctor's surgery and a school, and renaturalising the river and all of that. And it does, as far as we can see it, financially it just doesn't stack up. And then there's a big private sector application on Run Valley Way, 1,100 flats, but financially, coherently articulated why they need it. And yet, although Romford councillors are proposing 2,500 flats on their own site, for some reason, they're up in arms about the private sector development in Run Valley Way, which seems to us to be much more coherently argued, and certainly in terms of nature conservation is fantastic. So it's clear incoherence, isn't it? On the one hand, they're saying if it's out, apparently, seemingly, if it's our site, we can do it. Anyone else can't. And one of 2 things is going to be true there. So either it is financially sustainable to do those developments at a lower level with fewer properties, in which case the council should reduce the size of what they're proposing, and then they could say to the people in Run Valley Way, you should have fewer as well. Or there is a nasty financial truth out there, which is that it is only sustainable, perhaps, to build at that level in the centre of Romford, in which case they need to stop the grandstanding about Run Valley Way and get on with the practical matter of improving that, of bending it to what local people want and doing some proper planning. And it's bizarre, isn't it, that Romford Civic Society has had to do 2 freedom of information requests to try and get Romford councillors to explain their rationale behind Waterloo Road, 1,400 flats. Because we're quite willing to accept there may be very good reasons for it. We're not closed minds, but you need to explain that to people. And at the moment, it's looking very fishy, isn't it? Why is coherence important? Some sort of clear plan. Well, if we just take nature conservation, a big thing like renaturalising the river, which has absolutely for 5 years been at the centre of what we want, that is expensive, very expensive to do it properly, and it requires lots of planning. They need to look at hydraulics of the river right along it, because there's no point doing something lovely in Romford if it causes it to flood somewhere else. It requires clear planning and long-term commitment to it, and an understanding of what are we renaturalising, because the Rom is by nature shallow and wide, and it floods a lot. It floods a lot, and in the centre of the town it used to. So it creates a huge amount of problems, because raising the money for the, bearing in mind the problems that Graham's already told us about, if there's not a clear commitment to something long term, developers aren't going to pay into that. They don't have to. They've got enough they need to pay anyhow on top of building things. There are other examples. If we look at South Street, what we've argued there is, well, there may be a case for much higher development in Run Valley Way. Remains to be seen, doesn't it? See what inspectors say of that. But it needs to step down to South Street. But that needs some clear planning. It needs parameters put in place. Just, you know, people sticking their finger in there and thinking we'd like that will not stand up on appeal. So there are a whole range of things. If we could start on the health issue, where I understand the MP for Romford recently was saying, well, we kind of, about a week ago apparently, we can't have all of these developments because there's no infrastructure for health. And yet it's his friends who are the cabinet members who are responsible for coordinating that. And when that was mentioned I mentioned it at a planning committee recently, the chair of the Ovian Scrutiny Committee said, oh, I've spoken to various doctors. That's not her role. Her role is to hold the cabinet member to account. So we're seeing a complete, very unsatisfactory situation developing in Romford. So I think I'll probably stop there, as I could go on forever. But the main thing is seemingly breathtaking hypocrisy and just a huge level of incoherence.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're building a bit of a picture that everything's essentially moving too fast and too dense, with very low environmental gains, if any, really. And obviously, what the three of you have said so far is that we need to be looking at more sustainable placemaking policy that obviously brings communities with and isn't to the detriment of existing communities. So, no, it's a very interesting project. Can we bring Julia in now? I know you've got a PowerPoint as well for us, Julia. Oh, you're on mute. Hang on.
Right, done that.
There you go.
And I should be able to share my screen.
Yep.
Oh, let's make this bigger. Now I can. Right. Okay.
Yep.
So, we went through this earlier, and now I've not managed.
Slideshow across the top.
Oh, here we are. Perhaps down here.
That's yeah, brilliant.
Oh, that's good. Thanks, Chris. I forgot I've done those. That was just in case I couldn't see them. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. There's a few things. So what I thought perhaps I would do is I would put first of all into a PowerPoint, because that way then I won't lose my train of thought, because there are so many things that we can cover. Habitat loss to me is a massive one, and I know Andrew Curtin will be aware of just how I feel about that, and why I feel this is so important. Okay, I don't think I need to do an introduction, do I, Andrew? If you just give me the thumbs up, it's all right just to go on. Okay, super. Alrighty. So Bridge Close, a brief background. We were all brought together by the threat of compulsory purchase, which is an extremely effective tool used by local authorities. Now, in this project, you'll see that I have put just up in the corner, compulsory purchase, an effective tool for local authorities. It's worth reading that. It's really worth reading it and seeing how government is using this tool to acquire land on the cheap. And you'll understand why this is important as I go through this PowerPoint. Yes, I've lost that off my screen. I thought perhaps I would. Right, so CPO and the consequences of this effective land assembly tool, because that's what it is. Wide use of the CPO tool is creating conglomerates of developers and acquiring authorities who will ultimately destroy the British people's right to realise their dream to own their own homes and businesses. Exploitation of the CPO tool, CPO being compulsory purchase order. I'm sure you probably are all aware of what one of those are. Developers and acquiring authorities are using this as a guise for the betterment of the people, and are making billions of pounds using this CPO tool to acquire our homes and businesses for less than sale value. Market price in the shadow of CPO is not the same as the open market value. All right, it's valued in a completely different way, and most people don't understand that. I can explain about that a little bit later, but perhaps right now let's go through these, and then any questions I can sort of fill in. How does the CPO tool expedite overdevelopment? Acquiring authorities are able to use the tool under the guise of progress and need for housing. land and property can be taken at cost, enabling rapid development growth. Rapid development often leads to badly managed and planned housing estates. Bridge Close, well, compulsory purchasing existing businesses, a borough-wide story, which I'm sure it is. I mean, I've looked at other stories, but I try not to get too involved because I've got such a giant thing on my plate right here and right now. But Bridge Close, a thriving business community, is being described by the London Borough of Havering as a brownfield site, vacant, derelict, contaminated, underutilised. In a nutshell, prime for the taking, CPO. But who is the question? But for whom, sorry, is the question, is it, you know, useful? And from our perspective and experience, currently one of the last industrial sites left in Romford, home to multiple well-established family-run businesses turning over between 500,000 to 3 million, all employing local people, specialist office staff, IT teams, mechanical engineers, manufacturers, component design engineers, bespoke joiners, specialist catering suppliers. All of these businesses are under threat of losing their home. And when I talk about home, our offices are our homes. I probably spend more time in my office than I do in my home, to be honest. Even in this time of COVID, because of where our office is strategically placed and because of the size of the office, we are able to actually continue to work and have been able to throughout the whole of this awful COVID crisis. When Havering shared its intention to compulsory purchase our land and threaten our local livelihoods, we stood tall and ready to fight for our right to stay in the properties in which we run our businesses. In the shadow of compulsory purchase, 4 years on, our local businesses and staff are suffering under the strain, being brought on by the greed of a developer and an acquiring authority who wish to overdevelop the site and can only afford to do so by acquiring Bridge Close businesses for rock bottom prices. So overdevelopment, price and consequence. Overdevelopment. It was realised by Havering Council that our local infrastructure will not cope with the additional 2,000 vehicles serving this overdevelopment. An economical and arguably an eco-friendly but unsustainable way of dealing with this is to make Bridge Close a car-free zone with no vehicle access allowed for the school, medical centre or residents visitors, and there is no residential parking. I'm going to come back to that as well because Preou offered a place there. Very interesting because the council actually knew that we could never take it, despite it took 2 years for them to actually tell us about this. But I'll come back to that as another story. Price. September 2020, the private developers severed its tie with the acquiring authority due to the project not being financially viable. Consequence. Presently, for Bridge Close businesses, we are suffering ill health, financial loss, inability to work towards business goals, and yet we still contribute to the local economy by way of business rates, corporation tax, PAYE and national insurance, VAT, local employment, and specialised manufacturing and engineering opportunities, all of which will be lost to Havering's economy. I mean, I've really got to stress how important I feel opportunities, employment in manufacturing and engineering and mechanical engineering and construction it, but I feel far outweighs retail. Retail can be done online from giant warehouses. Our type of businesses, we need office space and we need manufacturing space, and it is being swallowed up for residential. And the guys under the Bridge Close development, they say that there are business opportunities. Again, it's all retail. Retail and coffee shops. So if you want to buy shares, you know where to get them. So, fighting over development. I'm asked what we can do to fight over development. I'm told you can't fight progress and need. We believe you can. We believe that energies placed in the right direction can stem overdevelopment and loss of habitat, community and industrial land. Government must listen to businesses. Lending an ear is not good enough. It must be realised that small businesses are the backbone of the country, providing employment and taxes. I propose to stop overdevelopment of industrial sites, make a start by reforming the compulsory purchase tool and stop its exploitation. So now I'll quickly move to something that a lot of people don't know, and something that I intend to do once this ugly mess in Bridge Close has gone away. I want to make people aware of what you can do to help yourself, because you're not told how to help yourself. And I'm talking about businesses here. So the things that acquiring authorities don't tell you about compulsory purchase, and I must make it very clear, it is up to you to ask. So when I've been told by Ardent Management, Glennie, formerly Glennie, and other consultants, that I've wasted my time because I won't get that time or expense back for investigating, looking into, understanding, being informed, because all of those things I've done, and I've spent a great deal of time doing it, to make sure that it places my family business. My dad started this business in 1961. I've worked here since ever. And my son Daniel joined us when he left school at 17 and has gone through universities to become an engineer. So it's very important to me that we keep this going. I don't want it lost. So I did take the time and effort. So I've just bullet pointed a couple of things that you need to know. And if you can afford to engage the following professionals, you'll need to do this, because if you don't, you will not come through the end of a compulsory purchase surviving, really. So the first thing I'd say is engage a local estate agent. They've got to know the area. 2, engage an RISC surveyor, but not the same person as the estate agent. Engage a forensic accountant who knows compulsory purchase experience, who has compulsory purchase experience and understands the technicalities, because most don't. Engage a lawyer. I'm talking about, you have to find these people, because you get a letter to tell you you're going to be compulsory purchase. We don't know what it means. This person needs to be an in-house employee, like me, for instance, as only they know the full extent of the implications of the acquisition of the company and the property behind. Because the compulsory purchase consultant the acquiring authority will tell you they will pay for, knows nothing about you. He's given a £4,000 budget to and negotiate on your behalf. It's impossible to go through a compulsory purchase with just that one person. So start somewhere, and you want to start with something that can really, really stick a nail. Look at the CPO tool, because that's what's being used. The backbone of that is being used to acquire land, and the land that's being acquired is obviously large portions of land. It's not small developments, it's large portions. So that's all from me. I hope I've covered a little harder.
Brilliant.
I'll hand over to you, Andrew.
Right, all right. Thanks very much, Julia. That was really informative, actually, as I've learned quite a few things about compulsory purchase tools as well that I'll be taking away from this. I'm going to read out a statement now from Richard Carr, who's the Managing Director of Rainham Steel, and then I'll bring the press in with any questions they've got for any of the speakers. Okie dokie. So, I'm sorry that I cannot be with you today, but I would not want to lose the opportunity to voice again my absolute disgust over the way in which this authority is blindly pushing residential development without any regard for the protection of businesses and jobs. 155 private flats and 84 social housing flats are to be located on existing industrial land immediately adjacent to our 5-acre yard in Rainham, and built by a joint venture between the London Borough of Havering and Notting Hill Genesis, a large housing association. We have been in this location for over 40 years, operating as an open steel stockyard and steel fabricator. We are a very noisy operation, employing over 90 people working up to 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. The greatest threat to our successful business will be through noise disturbance complaints, particularly at night. The noise consultants involved on both sides have confirmed that the noise levels are very high and not conducive to residential development under normal circumstances. The fact that no such mitigation has already been proposed to allow residents to be able to hypothetically live here is proof that complaints are very likely, if not guaranteed. Under pressure from us and the Council's Senior Public Protection Officer, the scheme has been conditioned so that no windows will be openable and that no windows or balconies will be installed on the southern elevations which face our operation. This is in addition to the need for boundary noise protection and a requirement for the properties to be highly insulated, ceiling boxes with mechanical ventilation and air conditioning to avoid overheating. The Council's Senior Public Protection Officer has confirmed that we would have no protection from noise complaints and that they would enforce against us and ultimately force the closure of the business if we could not operate peacefully alongside the residential occupiers. Havering Council have obtained compulsory purchase powers to buy the plots of land from the businesses on the application site, but Rainham Steel have not been included in the area covering the compulsory purchase order. This is obviously because our business would be very difficult to relocate and too expensive to buy out. Throughout the whole process, council officers have repeatedly refused to engage and seem to blindly follow the leader's wishes. The planning application was deferred twice by the planning committee following our objections, but was then unbelievably voted in by the Conservative members of the committee in July of this year. The application still has to be referred to the Secretary of State and the GLA before it is finally ratified. The evidence against the scheme is overwhelming, and it was plainly obvious that all of the Conservative members of the Planning Committee voted as instructed by the leader. I met with Damien White, the leader, earlier in the year, and it became very clear to me that he considers our business as collateral damage for what he thinks is the greater good of meeting residential targets. I told him that if this gets through, I will place adverts in the papers and hoardings along the boundary to the scheme, warning people not to buy or occupy the flats because of the noise disturbance they will be subjected to. The council are clearly prepared to do anything in their greed to meet housing targets, including building substandard housing and forcing out local businesses. This development should not go ahead due to its close proximity to our operation. Future residents should be able to live peacefully and not be required to keep their windows shut 24/7 to be protected from outside noise. Most importantly, the future of our company and the jobs of the people we employ should not be placed at risk because of the noise that we make in the normal course of our business. It is crystal clear to me that the current leader's political ambitions and control of Conservative councillors is not in the best interest of the people or businesses in the borough, and it's a real shame that democracy can be manipulated in this way. And that is the end of Richard's speech. I just want to add that, obviously, just again for the record, that was a statement from Richard Carr, the Managing Director of Rainham Steel, and obviously has no connection to me whatsoever as a councillor in the neighbouring borough, or the chair of the Dagenham and Rainham Labour Party. With that, that brings all of our speakers to a close and all of the statements. Are there any questions from either Michael Cox or Ross Elliott?
Yeah, I'll ask a couple, Andrew, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm just sort of wondering, since obviously our last chat, since you sort of announced the intentions to set up the group, but what response you'd had, if any, from sort of local residents and any businesses, and sort of what early response you had from people to what you're trying to do.
Graham?
Thank you, Michael. Obviously, we didn't launch Preserve at that point. We're launching it now and with a petition, and we'll gauge the response. But on social media, very favourable. Also, there was a few people remarked that we're a cross-party group and a member of nothing as well. In other words, it's a collaboration of different people who've come from different traditions, working together for the common interest, for the people, for the residents. So, you know, we're delighted to be able to work together, and I think you tend to find that once you talk to each other, there's actually an awful lot in common amongst everybody. But that's, you know, the party structure tries to build divides. But nevertheless, very good response, Michael, on social media. Well, obviously, we'll see how the petition goes, obviously, in due course, to get another gauge. Hopefully, you'll help promote it for us.
Yeah. And do you have a target for a number of signatures you're hoping for on the petition? What's your sort of end goal with what you're trying to achieve specifically through the petition?
John, do you want to answer that one?
We haven't got a set figure in mind, Michael, but our senses, I think, I speak for that. I think people, it struck a nerve already in the community because they can feel, just through their personal experiences around planning and local democracy and getting their voice heard, that the system is not working. More often than not, they don't quite know why, and it's a source of deep frustration. But I think they are very pleased that people are trying to put aside their political differences and try and create some sort of network of people that can call to account the system as it is, and also alert people to the fact that this could get even worse down the road. And you know, I think people are pleased that this is not just a political football. This is actually something that we're all trying to work together on, so that we can choke this off before it gets worse and actually claim back the system as it should function rather than it does. And I think the themes that we've heard about the incoherence, the lack of vision, the effects on businesses, communities, I think it will really hit a nerve in the community and we'll get a lot of support. Our idea is to get as many people as possible, organisations, individuals, whatever their political affiliation perspective, because I think this transcends a lot of the local political divisions that we usually operate with. You know.
Thanks, John. I think one more question from me. Andrew and Graham sort of mentioned private developments. You mentioned St George's in Hornchurch, and Andrew, you mentioned the Rhondda Valley plans. So you felt they actually had taken into account sort of what residents and the sort of views of locals. So can more be done to sort of lobby or liaise with developers directly in terms of getting across your points of view?
Graham, and then let Andrew come in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't really speak for the Rhondda Valley Way engagement, but I do know in the St George's, one of the keys, and I say I will bring it up at a future conference because I believe it's a model. One of the keys is that the developers were contacted, or vice versa, with local councillors. The local ward councillors walked the site, looked at the plans and reshaped it. Also, they worked with the committee, the planning committee. I even was invited to go down once or twice to the site. And in the end, we came to an agreement, if I can use that word, Michael, that was a good plan, and that the locals thought that it was sympathetic to the character. Generally, that's not happening. Generally, the developers, in my opinion, seek to get approval from our own planners or the administration, and then that's it, because we don't control the committees. So at the end of the day, they can push through anything as long as the administration and our local planners accept it. And as I've explained before, Michael, they are desperate to meet housing targets, and unfortunately they're cutting massive corners. And obviously we're starting to see the results. Thank you.
Andrew, do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, so developers are quite different one from another. Some of them are really happy to talk to us as a community group. And then there are others where the relationship is more fraught. Ironically, where we have the worst links, it's almost impossible. We know impossible to get to speak to the architects or developers on the council's own sites. So, for argument's sake, it's Conran's, the architects on Wolseley Road, in theory, not bad. And we produced about 4 years ago quite a large document, vision document, just ours. And we're a democratic organisation in that the committee is elected, but we're not elected in the sense of representing the whole community. So it was our vision. And we started to get some really good feedback from Conrad's, because one of the things we spoke about was the modernist housing development on the edge of Romford, on Romford Garden Suburb. On the edge there's 1911 estate, and then there's real modernist stuff at the end. And there's a Soviet architect work there called Lubekin, who's really significant. And actually my late father began the restoration of that property. And we mentioned that in our document as looking at modern ways of doing things. You need to be in touch with the modern age and how people want to live now. Really positive feedback from Conrad's, and one of their senior partners said he'd done his dissertation on Lubeck and had lots of ideas. We were looking forward to a dialogue with them, and it was stopped. Absolutely. So we're not going to embarrass them. We think Conrad's probably good people, but that input isn't there. We had a very good relationship with the people at Rhondda Valley Way. They came to our meetings a couple of times, answered some very hard questions. In that, on that site, what we've always pushed around is the green agenda. It's a very clear green vision they have, particularly around the river, and that, as we say, is expensive. Where we ended up, having to compromise is it is also a big development. But they did coherently, and obviously Graham can't take part in this because obviously he's going to have to at some stage consider that, so he's not going to be able to take part in this now. But they were willing to present their financials to us. Now obviously we can't see behind that, but again that's a marked difference from LBH, who we have to do a freedom of information request to get behind it. So that's why I say we're in a situation with Rhondda Valley Way where either Romford councillors are running a big campaign against it, which is fair enough politically. Either they're being disingenuous because they know from their own sites that it cannot, if you're going to develop there, it has to be dense, or they know it can be done for less, but they want to squeeze more onto their sites and stop others doing, which just on a very basic level, if that goes to appeal, or Graham will know better than I, the levels at which it goes to the Mayor of London, and the Mayor of London or people like that will go, what does policy say? Let's do that. So actually these grandstanding campaigns don't gain us an environmental benefit at all because they're not necessarily based in reality. But we can work with developers. Others we've had bad relationships with, the people who wanted to knock down the Page Calman building at the corner of North Street and the Ring Road. They wouldn't budge, and we said, well, that building's protected, so we're not budging either. You can turn it to other uses, you can make some slight changes to it, but they weren't going to budge. We organised a huge campaign against it. The council failed to take a decision on it at all. It was an open and shut refusal to my mind, but they didn't send it to committee. So therefore, not unreasonably, again, we didn't agree with their proposal, but the developers went to the inspector on the grounds of non-determination, because the council just hadn't decided what it wanted to do, whereas to my mind, much stronger to have gone to committee and been refused. Fortunately, the inspector just about came down on our view, the right side. But it's a very high risk strategy and a very high risk way of doing it.
Okay, yeah, thank you everyone for answering those questions.
I've got a quick question just before. I'm not sure if Ross has got any, but I've got a quick question. So obviously this is mainly focused at overdevelopment and poor quality developments. I know Graham sort of alluded to the Orchard Village fiasco during his statement. But I just wondered, will this group be looking at affordability? Because even if we do, even if the group does succeed in reducing the level of density and the developments, I think it's really important that the properties that we are building are within grasp of local people, basically, are available for local people. And, you mentioned the St George's site. Just out of interest, I went and signed up to their sort of waiting list just to find out how much the properties would be. And a 1-bedroom property is just under £400,000. And, also in line with that, the Bean Park development. I know a couple that live in South Hornchurch that went and inquired at the marketing suite, and they both have good jobs. They both earn over 30 grand, so they've got a combined income of over 60 grand. And they were told that basically they wouldn't be able to afford one of the properties there, a 1-bed property. So I think it's really important that whilst you're fighting against overdevelopment, you also have to be fighting for the right development. It can't just, in my mind, it can't just be a no to development whatsoever. It has to be the right kind that is for local people. Just wondered what your thoughts are on that, any of you. Graham? Yep.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, it's a difficult conundrum, isn't it? Because everybody uses the word affordable. When you actually look at it, it's not affordable. Affordable housing in planning terms is just rent, some form of rent. I'm in favour of shared ownership where possible, but obviously it's difficult if you haven't got the means, whatever. So in the end, I don't think it's a conversation about development. I think it's a conversation about money and people's wages. And the problem is, it's another conversation, but it's because house prices over the last 10, 20, 30 years have gone up far in advance of increases in wages. So they become impossible to own a house for many people because, as I say, I haven't got the figures in front of me, but house prices might have tripled and your wages only doubled. I mean, if you get the drift. Yeah. See, the gap has got wider and wider. So I'm particularly concerned about people who traditionally would want to get on the housing ladder. And that's great because there's lots of benefits to that, not only for the individual, but also for the community. So we need to find a mechanism for that. But I think the problem is far greater than what we can do, Andrew. It's the market, it's the government, it's the people involved. It's just got beyond us. And of course, as you say, you can rent a property that's supposedly affordable, but you may be paying high rents as well. But I think you're right that there is a big problem, but it's not something that Preserve will be able to resolve. It's really a problem for perhaps a government to intervene, because these house prices that keep rising, it's not right. It's not good. Thank you.
Julia, did you want to come in?
Yeah, Andrew, talking and thinking about that, it is something close to everyone's mind. I've got 2 children. One's just moved out. One's going to be moving out probably in the next few years. But I don't believe flooding a market.
Oh, you've frozen. I don't know if
that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to flood the market. Now, the thing is they're flooding the market now, which they have been doing for a long time, yet the properties are not coming up any cheaper. So there's a bigger problem here. Like Graham said, it's about the salaries, but then how can companies afford to pay more salaries, especially in these coming years? You know, we're going to have big problems from COVID-19 and going forward. So I think, like Graham said, there are so many other things to take into account. But I don't believe flooding the market with property is the right way of doing it. I don't think that's the answer to the problem. Anyway.
Thanks, Sheila. And of course, it just sprung to my mind, part of this developers charter that's coming forward is that developers don't necessarily have to meet the affordable housing allocation levels. I think it's at 35% at the moment. So yeah, no, it's just another thing to consider. Are there any other questions or any other comments that anybody else wants to make in addition to what's been said? Ross?
I have a few, but lucky enough you've asked one for me, so it's all good. I'll get on to the so the first one's to Andrew C, if you don't mind. We've seen recently some belated opposition from the Conservatives to the seabed centre development. What are your thoughts on this?
So that's the Ron Valley Way one, which I've spoken about several times. We've had quite a good relationship with the developers there, and we've managed to get quite a number of things that we've lobbied for a long time in on that one. And on balance, after literally, I think we've been working on that for about a year or so. On balance, we've supported that scheme and we've written in support of it. It's a large scheme, very good for nature. You never get entirely what you want, and we'll have to wait and see what the committee does. But it is bizarre, really, that Romford councillors themselves, because the reason why that scheme's big, the reason why we're running into a brick wall on that, is they are willing to share, well, not obviously all of their finances, but in their application, there's a very full account of why they need that level of property to do the things they want to on that site to generate the money. Part of it, picking up other Andrew's point, is around 35% of affordable housing. So as they point out, that's something which as a developer, they're not making profit on from their point of view. And at the same time, we want the river redeveloped and all of that. But another reason for that is literally a stone's throw away from that. Romford counts themselves, so 1,100 flats on Ron Valley Way. On balance, we're backing that one, though we appreciate it's controversial. 1,400 flats Romford councillors want to put on Wolseley Road, 1,100 flats on Bridge Close, and financially, as Julia's told us, that doesn't even financially stack up. So the taxpayers, they've put their hands in the taxpayer's pocket and we've generously bought out the partners there. So frankly, how dare they then, you know, oppose an 1,100 flat development there? Why weren't they working with the developers? Why weren't they speaking to them and, you know, making their points? We're not saying that scheme's perfect, but it's certainly a lot more open than their one. So the position there is either they know you can't do a development there with less than 1,100 flats, in which case their campaign is completely hypocritical, or they know you can do it with less, in which case they need to reduce the scale of their developments. And then you can say to the private sector developments, right, we've reduced ours on Waterloo Road, say, from 1,400 to 1,000. Yours needs to come down to 650. Until they do that, it's just political window dressing. And it's not seriously talking about society or environment in the town. So that's a long way of saying where we are with Ron Valley Way. But very good for nature and a very clear green thing there, though it's large.
Thank you, Andrew. Next question to Graham Williamson. When speaking about the local plan, you seem to suggest that the council aren't really protecting the character of the borough. Maybe you could highlight some of the places where they could change.
Okay, Ross. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's lots of agencies involved in this, developers, government, and local government. And it seems to me that we've taken a hands off the tiller, Havering Council. myself and the leader of the opposition, we put 38 suggestions towards the new local plan. A, none of them were adopted. B, we never got a response. It must have gone in the bin. Dare I say it, I think some of them had some validity to them, certainly could have been debated with us, but they didn't want to do that. And basically it's because they're taking away all the restrictions, removing those restrictions like heights, for instance. I did mention that. Give an example, in the business world, we've had Rainham Steel comment on the conflict between residential and businesses. They're introducing they want to introduce a new clause which says that if there's, in the event of that conflict, the businesses will be relocated, So in other words, that they're actually changing things in order to create what they actually want. So I think there's an awful lot we can do to improve the character. If they adopted the St George's, albeit I take on board what Andrew's saying, but I believe that's a bigger problem. If you take that as a model, then obviously you're saying to developers, this is a model, we want you to do this, that and the other. And if it ever went to appeal, if you lost an application, the inspector looks at the local plan. What is a local, because a local plan has to be approved by an inspector, just like the London plan, no different. So when the local plan says this, this and this, the inspector says, okay, did they adhere to that local plan in any way? No, you lose your appeal. But Havering's not doing that. Havering's just saying, let's use the London plan, which is not going to be good for an outer borough. That's one of the problems. So we've been very lazy, in my opinion. And in fact, my personal opinion is we've done this deliberately in order to give a green light to developers. And also we need to enforce whatever we have in the local plan. Give you just one example. Our surveys suggest that we need quite a high level of family homes, which is 3 bedrooms plus. And in fact, the local plan, which may go through, is talking about 50% family homes in, I think, affordable housing, and up to 80%, perhaps 70 to 80% on private market. We're getting applications going through on 9%. 9%. And the reason is because developers make more money by having 1-bedroom properties, by cramming it in together. It works for them. Does it work for us? No, it doesn't. But not once has our planners ever rejected or asked for a rejection on an application because of that reduction of local family homes. So what's going on? Why are we not enforcing our own local plan, let alone having nothing in it that gives protection? So it's very, very disappointing. And very quickly, if I could mention, developers normally go for 20% profit on their schemes. Affordable housing is normally a 6% profit. So one of the conflicts and pressures is that if you have lots of affordable housing, the developer says, well, I still want to make 20%. Wouldn't it be great if we all could, yeah? They still want to make the 20%, so they have to cut corners on quality, potentially, because they still want 20%. So if they're giving away a load to 35 or 50% to 6%, they have to make the money somewhere else. Perhaps that's because we're seeing massive densities. That's why they're doing it. So it's a lot of smokes and mirrors, and we need to do a lot more. But as Andrew has pointed out, it's very hard to get the information out from the council. It's very hard. You have to dig very, very deep to find these things. They want us to be dumb and not realise what's going on. Fortunately, some of us are not prepared to do that. But as I say, as Andrew said, there's lots of obstacles in the way. In terms of developers, though, I think we should, looking at preferred developers, we should try and encourage them. Obviously, it has to be above board and transparent, of course. But if the developers that want to work with us and want to talk to ward councillors, want to talk to the community, want to talk to the administration, whoever that is, I would support that. And if they're favourable, we can push developers and developments towards those that we like, because they fit in what we want. At the moment, it's a free-for-all. Whoever's got the money and the time and the effort comes in, and we just say, okay. And there are the good, the bad and the ugly. And I think we need to start looking at who wants to help Havering, continue with its character, yet obviously make a profit, but at the same time, give us some affordable housing, whatever that's supposed to mean, as best as we can for the local people. In my opinion, we're in control of what's happening. They're in control of us. Thank you.
John, did you want to come in on that? So you.
I would just add one thing to that. It's the culture around the council. And this is a general criticism of the council. It's not just about planning, but a form of leadership, a style of command and control, an exclusion of any type of dialogue or plural engagement with the communities, different political parties. There's no agility there. There's no respect for differences and different political traditions and voices and the genuine accountability. This actually reaches into some other debates that have been around the community for the last few months around my way or the highway, a form of leadership, which really gets in the way of taking the community with you on these outstanding big ticket. So that making, and actually I think people see it, and it's a source of frustration amongst us all that you can't even have a genuine dialogue and a positive engagement for the common good in the community. And this is the thing that really frustrates me more than anything. I mean, I've worked with Conservative administrations, Labour administrations. I just like good governance and accountability and positive engagement around these issues that are concerning in the community. And so there's the culture issue is just beneath the surface in all these conversations as well.
Thank you. One last question, just very quick one. Maybe John, you can answer this. Could you summarise the main aims of Preserve?
It just touches on what I've said. It's trying to inject a level of democratic accountability and voice amongst the citizens of those who are on the sharp end, a lot of the planning systems. There's escalating frustration. I think actually the leader and the MP for Romford's, their voice around the seabed case in the public the last week or so, they are aware that this is growing concern in the community, this planning things. So they're trying to demonstrate their own bona fides in this. Slightly desperate, it looked to me. But I think the objective of Preserve is to try and work across the aisle, all the political traditions coming together in the interest of the community as a whole, to put a check and balance around the question of overdevelopment and bring in accountability and democracy at the heart of the decision-making process so citizens can live fulfilling lives in the future. That's basically what it's all about for me.
Thank you very much.
Nobody else has indicated that they want to ask another question. No, so I think that brings us to a close. As I said, I put the link to the petition in the group chat, and I'll make the recording available to the Havering Daily Romford Recorder and Time 107.5, and similarly to last time, I'll also put it on YouTube as well, so it can be watched back. Just leaves me to say thanks everybody for an interesting discussion, and look forward to hearing more about Preserve and the work as it moves forward.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Everybody. See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.